It happened so fast that, even now, when I replay that night in my mind, it feels unreal. The sound of the glass hitting the wall, sharp, sudden, violent, still echoes inside me. My own son-in-law, the man my daughter swore loved her more than anything, had just thrown a whiskey glass at me. And the reason? Because I refused to pour him another drink. I remember the smell before anything else. The faint warmth of roast chicken, the woody scent of whiskey, and that almost metallic chill of tension that you can't describe but you feel in your bones. My daughter, Emily, had asked me to host dinner that night. She said it was just to spend some family time. But from the way she avoided my eyes when she asked, I already knew there was more to it. Her husband, Mark, walked in first, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing that grin that always felt like it had a timer on it. The kind of smile people wear just to get through the first 5 minutes of politeness before showing who they really are. He brought a bottle of expensive whiskey, the kind that tries to make up for everything it ruins later. "Special night," he said, setting the bottle down like it was some sort of gift. "Figured we should celebrate." "Celebrate what?" I asked. Even though I already knew he didn't have an answer, he just smirked and said, "Family." That word, family, always sounds different when it comes from someone who disrespects it. We sat at the table, the four of us. Me, my daughter, Mark, and my husband, who was mostly quiet these days after his stroke. The first pour of whiskey was fine. We all toasted, half-heartedly. But the moment the glass hit the table again, I could see it in Mark's eyes. The switch had flipped, his shoulders loosened, his jokes got louder, his tone sharper. Every story became about him, how hard he worked, how people didn't appreciate him, how soft everyone else was. He even mocked my husband, calling him old-fashioned for saying that real men don't raise their voices at the dinner table. I wanted to stop him right there, but I saw Emily's face. That polite, tight-lipped smile that daughters wear when they're just trying to keep peace. So I stayed silent. For her. But then came the moment that changed everything. Mark lifted his glass again and held it out to me. "Top me off," he said, smiling like it was an order disguised as a request. "You've had enough," I told him gently. "Let's eat first." He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. I said, "Top me off." And just like that, the temperature in the room dropped. You could feel the air thickening, heavy with that kind of quiet that means something bad is about to happen. My daughter shifted in her seat. My husband looked down, hands trembling slightly against his fork. I didn't move. I didn't pour. I just looked at him, straight into his eyes. The kind of look that says, "I'm not scared of you, even if everyone else is." He didn't like that. Not one bit. "You think you can tell me what to do in my own family?" he sneered. "Your family?" I repeated. "You married into it, Mark. Don't forget that." That's when he did it. Without warning, he grabbed the glass from the table and flung it toward the wall, right next to my head. The sound of it shattering against the paint was louder than any shout could have been. My daughter screamed. My husband tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey him. And I didn't flinch. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was that I'd been expecting this moment for months. I stared at the whiskey dripping down the wall, the amber liquid slowly tracing lines down the white paint like it was bleeding. And then I looked at him. His breathing was uneven, chest rising and falling like an animal's. For a second, I thought he might say sorry. But he didn't. He just muttered something under his breath, something about respect, and sat back down. Emily was crying now, not loud sobs, but that silent kind of crying that comes from being embarrassed for someone you still love. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, shaking her head slightly as if to say, "Don't make it worse." And that broke something in me. Because it wasn't the first time. Maybe not the glass, but the disrespect, the way he talked to her, the way she walked on eggshells, the way his temper controlled the whole atmosphere of any room they were in. I'd seen it all. in the way she'd defend him when no one was attacking, in the way she'd excuse his moods, and in the way her eyes lost their light one day at a time. I stood up from the table and said something I hadn't planned. "Get out." Mark froze. "What?" "You heard me. Leave my house." He laughed, that same arrogant, mocking laugh. "You think you can talk to me like that?" I just did. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. When you've lived long enough, you learn that power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from certainty. He stood up too, his chair scraping violently against the floor. For a second, I thought he might hit me. My husband tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Emily was pleading now, begging him to sit down, to stop. But Mark just glared at me, eyes burning with that kind of rage that isn't about the moment. It's about every woman who's ever refused to obey him. And then something unexpected happened. He left. Just walked out. No apology, no goodbye. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. The silence that followed felt like a storm had passed, but left the house wrecked. Emily ran after him, of course. She always did. And I just stood there, staring at the broken glass on the floor, the whiskey pooling near my feet, and thought, how did it come to this? That night, I didn't sleep. Not a minute. I sat by the window, listening to the hum of distant cars, the soft ticking of the clock, and the sound of my own heartbeat, slow and steady, like it was counting something down. I knew this wasn't over. Men like Mark don't just leave and move on. They come back. They always come back, not for love, but for control. The next morning, Emily came alone. Her eyes were swollen. She sat at the table, the same one where everything had fallen apart, and whispered, "Mom, please don't tell anyone. He didn't mean it." I wanted to scream, to tell her that love isn't supposed to make you afraid, that no man has the right to make you feel small. But instead, I just took her hand, because sometimes mothers don't say what they want to. They say what their daughters can bear to hear. "He threw a glass at me, Emily," I said quietly. "What happens when he throws something at you?" She didn't answer, just stared at the wall behind me, the faint stain where the whiskey had been. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't ready to leave him. Not yet. But something had shifted. The fear wasn't just mine anymore. She'd seen it too. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was brewing. Because a man like that doesn't get humiliated and stay quiet. He stews. He plans. And when he returns, he doesn't come for reconciliation. He comes for payback. And deep down I knew the next time he walked through that door, it wouldn't just be words or glass. It would be something worse. Days passed, but the air in that house never really cleared. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every car that slowed down outside made my heart beat faster. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe I'd imagined the danger, but people like Mark don't let things go. They hold grudges like currency. Emily kept calling, trying to act normal. "He's sorry, Mom," she said one morning over the phone. "He just had a lot to drink." I stayed silent, letting her fill the silence the way guilty people do. "He didn't mean it. He's been under stress at work. You know how men can be sometimes." I wanted to ask, and when did stress become an excuse to throw glass? But I didn't. She wouldn't have heard me anyway. When someone's in denial, logic sounds like noise. So instead, I said, "Emily, you don't have to protect him. You're my daughter. You don't owe me explanations for his behavior." There was a pause, then a quiet whisper. "I'm not protecting him, Mom. I'm protecting us." That one line haunted me all day. Protecting us. It told me everything I didn't want to know. Later that evening, I decided to drive over. My husband tried to stop me, but I couldn't sit still anymore. Mothers can feel when something's wrong. It's like a knot deep in your gut that tightens with every breath. I told myself I was just going to check in, maybe bring dinner. But truthfully, I was preparing for something. I didn't know what, but I could feel it. When I pulled into their driveway, the lights were off except one, the kitchen. I walked up quietly, and through the window I saw him, Mark, sitting at the table, half drunk, staring into nothing. There were empty bottles beside him, his shirt undone, his eyes glazed with that same venom I'd seen before. And then I heard it. Her voice. Emily's. She was speaking softly, too softly. "Please, Mark, not tonight." He slammed his hand on the table. "You embarrassed me. Do you have any idea what you did to me at your mother's house?" "I didn't do anything." "You made me look weak," he shouted, standing up so fast the chair crashed behind him. "You and your mother think you can talk to me like that." I didn't think. I just opened the door. The sound startled them both. Emily turned toward me, eyes wide with fear. Mark froze, bottle still in hand. "Get out," I said, my voice steady but low. He looked at me, half amused, half enraged. "You again. You don't know when to stop, do you?" "You've had enough," I said, stepping closer. "Put the bottle down." He smirked, lifting it slightly. "Not like a weapon yet, but close enough." "Or what? You'll call the cops? You think they'll take your side over mine?" And that's when Emily did something that surprised all of us. She grabbed the bottle from his hand and threw it into the sink, glass shattering, whiskey spilling everywhere. "Enough, Mark," she shouted. Her voice cracked, but it was the first time I'd ever heard her shout at him. For a moment, there was just silence. His face twitched with rage, but something in him broke too. He stared at her, stunned, then at me. His breathing quickened, and then he started to laugh, a dry, bitter laugh. "You both think you've won," he said, grabbing his jacket. "You'll regret this." He walked out, slamming the door behind him so hard it shook the frame. Emily sank to the floor. I rushed to her, pulling her into my arms. Her body was trembling, and for the first time in years she cried, not quietly, not carefully, but like someone finally letting out everything they'd been forced to hold in. I wanted to tell her it was over, that he was gone, but deep down I knew he wasn't. Men like him don't just disappear, they retreat, they wait. For the next few days, Emily stayed with us. She barely spoke, just moved like a ghost through the house. I tried to distract her with chores, cooking, even silly old family stories, but her mind was somewhere else. Late at night, I'd find her sitting by the window, staring out at the road as if expecting his car to appear any minute. On the fourth night, the phone rang. It was his number. I picked it up before she could. "What do you want, Mark?" His voice was slurred but cold. "Tell my wife she'll regret walking out. You both will. Don't you dare threaten her." "I'm not threatening," he said. "I'm promising." Then he hung up. That was the night I called the police. Not because I thought they'd protect us. They rarely do in situations like this. But because I needed a record. I wanted someone, somewhere, to know this man was dangerous. When the officer came, a young guy who couldn't have been older than 30, he nodded politely, wrote things down, and said, "We'll keep an eye out." But even he didn't sound convinced. After he left, my husband, who'd been quiet all week, finally spoke. "You know he's not done, right?" "I know," I said, and I was right. 2 nights later, just past midnight, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. Headlights flashed briefly through the curtains. Emily was asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally pulling her under. My heart pounded as I walked to the window. A dark car sat idling in the driveway. The driver's silhouette was unmistakable. Mark. He didn't move for a long time. Just sat there, watching the house. Then the engine cut off. I grabbed the phone, ready to call the police again. But before I could dial, he stepped out. That same familiar swagger, the same arrogance. But now, there was something colder about it. He walked up the path slowly, like he was rehearsing every step. I could see the faint glint of something in his hand, metallic, thin. I felt my breath catch. I shook my husband awake and whispered, "He's here." Everything after that happened in a blur. The banging on the door, the shouting, the sudden crash, as glass shattered again, but this time, it wasn't whiskey. It was the living room window. Emily screamed. My husband grabbed the phone, shouting into it for help. I ran to her, trying to pull her away from the window. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The sound of footsteps retreating, the roar of an engine starting, tires screeching into the night. And then, silence again. When the police arrived, Mark was gone. They found tire marks on the driveway, pieces of glass from the window, and his boot print near the door. The officer sighed, said he'd file a report, and told us to stay somewhere else for a few days. So we did. We packed what we could and drove to my sister's house an hour away. But I could feel it in Emily. This wasn't safety. This was running. And running never lasts forever. Because when someone like him loses control, they don't stop chasing it until they get it back. And I knew, sooner or later, he'd come looking again. Not just for her this time. For me too. At my sister's house, everything looked calm on the surface. The smell of lavender candles, the faint hum of her old refrigerator, the safety of thick curtains drawn shut. But that kind of calm doesn't reach your bones when you know it's borrowed. It's like pretending the storm has passed, just because you can't hear the thunder anymore. Emily barely spoke. She'd sit on the porch most evenings watching the road, her fingers tracing the rim of a coffee mug she never drank from. Sometimes, I'd hear her whisper his name under her breath, not in longing but in disbelief, like she still couldn't believe the man she'd chosen could turn into a monster. I didn't push her to talk. When someone's been broken, words don't fix them, patience does. But 3 days in, my phone started ringing again. Unknown numbers, one after another. I ignored the first few, but by the 5th call, my nerves couldn't take it anymore. I picked up. Silence on the other end, just breathing. "Mark?" I said. A pause. Then a whisper. "You think you can hide her from me?" I didn't answer. He chuckled, low and deliberate. "You think your sister's little house is safe? You don't even realize how close I am." The call ended before I could say anything. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I didn't tell Emily that night. She had been sleeping better for the first time in weeks, and I couldn't take that from her. Instead, I sat by the window until dawn, every shadow outside feeling like it might move. Every car that passed made my heart jump. By morning, I had made a decision. Enough hiding, enough waiting. If the police couldn't protect us, I would. I went to a lawyer, an old friend of my husband's, and told him everything. He listened quietly, his brow tightening as I spoke. "You have grounds for a restraining order," he said. "It might not stop him, but it'll build a paper trail. Courts take escalation seriously." So we filed one. I remember signing the papers with my hand shaking slightly, not because I was afraid, but because I knew what this meant. Mark would see it as war. When he was served, it was like poking a sleeping beast. He sent Emily a dozen texts in the next 2 days, apologies mixed with threats. "I love you," followed by "You'll regret this." Typical abuser's script. Then, for a while, nothing. No calls. No visits. Just quiet. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally moved on. Maybe the paperwork and the fear of arrest had sobered him. Emily started laughing again, slowly. She'd make breakfast, talk about work, even joke about small things like the way my sister's cat would glare at her shoes. For the first time in months, the house felt like a home again. Until one night when my husband woke me up around 2 a.m., he whispered, "There's someone outside." I froze. I slipped out of bed, moving toward the living room window, my breath shallow. Outside, in the dim moonlight, I could make out the faint shape of a car parked a little too far down the road to be random. Engine off. No lights. But I could feel it. Someone was inside, watching. We didn't call the police this time. I knew how that would go. They'd show up, flash their lights, find nothing, and drive away, leaving us with the dark again. So instead, I sat awake till sunrise, staring out that same window, watching that same car, until it finally disappeared with the morning light. That morning, I made Emily coffee and told her we were moving back home. She looked shocked. "Mom, what? After everything?" "Yes," I said. "Because I'm done being afraid in someone else's house." She argued at first, said it wasn't safe, said he'd come back. But I told her something I truly believed. If he comes back, this time he won't find the same woman waiting. When we pulled up to our house that afternoon, it felt like stepping into the past. The glass was replaced, the walls repainted, but I could still see the faint scar of whiskey that never quite came out. It reminded me of us, cracked, scrubbed clean, but never fully erased. That first night home was quiet. Too quiet. My husband snored lightly in his chair, the television flickering with some late-night rerun. Emily had gone to bed early. I made tea and sat by the window again, like I always do when I can't sleep. And that's when I saw it, the porch light flicker once, then twice. At first, I thought it was a wiring issue. But then the motion sensor light turned on, and through the faint glow I saw a shadow move across the yard. I froze. The shape was unmistakable. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving slow. Mark. I didn't call out. I didn't move. I just watched as he approached the door. No rush, no hesitation. Like he belonged there. Like the house still answered to him. Then came the soft, deliberate knock. I glanced toward Emily's room. She was asleep. My husband, too. The knock came again, louder this time. I walked to the door, my hands cold but steady. My reflection in the small window pane looked older, harder. I didn't feel fear anymore, not the kind that paralyzes. This was something different. Sharper, calmer, the kind of fear that prepares. When I opened the door, he was standing there, his eyes sunken, his clothes wrinkled, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Evening," he said, voice low and hoarse. "You didn't think a piece of paper would stop me, did you?" I didn't answer. He stepped closer. "I just came to talk." "About what?" I asked. "About my wife," he said, his tone twisting on the word. "You took her from me. She left because she was afraid of you." He chuckled, leaning in. "Afraid? No, she's confused. You did that. You turned her against me. You've been poisoning her since the beginning." I stood my ground. "You threw a glass at me, Mark. You terrified your wife. You don't get to play the victim." His smile faded. His jaw clenched. "You think you're safe because you're old? Because you have that weak husband in there? And a piece of paper with my name on it?" He took one step forward. That's when I said it. The sentence that had been building inside me for months. "If you take one more step, you'll find out what fear really feels like." He stopped. For a second I saw uncertainty flash across his face. Not fear, just confusion. Like he was recalculating the kind of woman standing in front of him. Then he sneered. "You wouldn't dare." I held his gaze. "Try me." The air between us went still. He stared for a few long seconds, then turned around and walked off into the dark, his footsteps fading into silence. But I knew better than to think that was the end, because that kind of quiet doesn't mean peace. It means preparation. And something in my gut told me that the next time he showed up, it wouldn't be just to talk. For the next 2 weeks, the silence felt like standing in the middle of a minefield. Everything looked calm, but you knew one wrong move could blow it all up. Emily tried to pretend things were normal. She went back to work, visited friends again, even started humming when she cooked. But her eyes still darted toward the windows whenever a car slowed down outside. I didn't say anything. We were all trying to heal in our own ways. My husband spent most of his days in the garden again, trimming roses that hadn't bloomed since spring. It felt symbolic somehow, like we were trying to bring life back to something that had nearly withered away. Then, one evening, Emily came home looking uneasy. She stood at the door, holding her purse tight against her chest. "Mom," she said, voice shaking just slightly, "I think he's been following me." I stopped what I was doing. "What do you mean?" "At work I saw a car, same one he drives, parked across the street. When I left, it moved. I took another route home, but it was behind me for a while." My stomach dropped. "Did you get the license plate?" She nodded. "I did. I wrote it down." She handed me a crumpled piece of paper, the numbers scrawled in a shaky hand. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew that plate by heart. It was his. That night, we went to the police station again. The officer on duty glanced at the paper, sighed, and said they'd look into it. I could tell by his tone that meant, "We'll add it to the pile." When we got back home, Emily broke down. Not just tears, full, shaking, gasping, gripping my arm like a child who just woke from a nightmare. "He's never going to stop, is he?" I wanted to lie, to tell her yes, that people like him eventually run out of anger. But they don't. They just find new ways to express it. So instead, I said, "He's going to stop because we're going to make him." That night, I barely slept. I sat on the edge of my bed, thinking through every possibility. Cameras, alarms, maybe even moving again. But something inside me was done running. For months, he'd made me the scared one. The one who hides, who watches, who waits. Not anymore. The next morning, I went to a hardware store and came back with 2 security cameras, motion lights, and something I never thought I'd buy, a small lockbox for a firearm. My husband didn't argue. He just nodded quietly, as if he'd been waiting for me to reach that decision on my own. We set up the cameras that afternoon, one facing the driveway, one aimed toward the backyard. Every sound of drilling, every click of tightening screws felt like reclaiming a little piece of power. And for a while, it worked. The days rolled by without incident. Emily's shoulders loosened a little when she smiled. Even I began to believe that maybe, finally, we'd scared him off. Until the night it happened. It was around 11:30 p.m. The house was quiet. Emily had gone to bed early. My husband had fallen asleep in his chair again, the TV humming softly in the background. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard a faint crunch outside, the sound of gravel shifting under slow footsteps. I froze. The hairs on my arm stood up. I turned off the faucet. The only sound now was the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. Then another crunch. Closer this time. I moved to the window, careful not to make noise. The porch light flicked on, triggered by motion, and there he was. Mark. Standing halfway up the driveway, his face partly hidden by the dark. He wasn't drunk this time. His movements were too deliberate, too focused. He wasn't here for chaos. He was here for something planned. I reached for my phone, but before I could dial, I saw the glint of metal in his hand. My breath caught. Not a bottle, not a tool. Something worse. I grabbed the gun from the lockbox by the drawer. I'd practiced once, just enough to know how to load it. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I stepped into the hallway quietly, my heart pounding. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, wide-eyed. "Mom, what's going on?" "Stay upstairs," I whispered. The doorknob rattled, once, twice. Then came the sound of it slamming. He was trying to break it open. My husband woke up with a start, panicked. "Who's there?" "Stay back," I told him. Then the door gave way. Splintered wood, a burst of cold air. Mark stepped in, eyes wild, breathing hard. "You think you can hide her from me?" he shouted. "She's my wife!" "Not anymore," I said, leveling the gun. "Get out!" He laughed, but there was something desperate in it this time. "You won't shoot me. You're not that kind of woman." "Maybe not," I said, "but you made me one." For a moment, everything froze. The house, the air, the noise outside, even Emily on the stairs, frozen in fear. Then he took a step forward. I didn't think, I just reacted. The gun went off. The sound was deafening, a flash of light. Then, silence. Mark staggered, eyes wide, hand clutching his shoulder. He stumbled backward, hitting the doorframe, and fell outside onto the porch. Emily screamed. My husband shouted for me to call an ambulance. I stood there, my hands still trembling around the gun, my chest heaving. The police came within minutes. They cuffed him where he lay, bleeding but alive. As they dragged him away, he kept looking at me, not angry anymore, just shocked, like he couldn't believe the woman he used to control had finally stopped being afraid. In the days that followed, the investigation cleared me. Self-defense. They said he was lucky to be alive. I didn't feel lucky. I didn't feel anything. Just empty. Emily stayed quiet for a long time after that. But one morning, she came into the kitchen, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "You saved my life." And that's when it finally hit me. Fear doesn't disappear when you fight back. It stays. But it changes. It becomes something else, something you can live with. Because the truth is, I didn't shoot him out of anger. I shot him because I refused to let him take one more piece of peace from this family. And when the trial comes, and it will, I'll stand there and tell the truth. That night wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. And for the first time in a long time, I finally felt alive again. The trial came quicker than we expected. 6 weeks after the shooting, I was standing in a courthouse that smelled like old paper and cold metal, under lights so bright they made everything feel too real. The reporters outside had already twisted the story into a headline, "Mother-in-law shoots drunken son-in-law in domestic dispute." They made it sound like some family drama gone wrong, not what it really was. The night a woman finally drew a line no man should have crossed. Mark sat on the other side of the room, his arm in a sling, looking smaller somehow. The arrogance that used to pour out of him was gone. What replaced it was something different, humiliation. His lawyer kept whispering in his ear, but he wasn't listening. He just stared at the table, jaw tight, eyes cold. Emily sat beside me, holding my hand under the table. Her fingers were shaking, but her grip was firm. It was strange. For months I'd been the one protecting her, but now she was the one grounding me. When it was my turn to speak, the courtroom went quiet. The judge asked me to describe the night in question, and I told them everything. Every detail. How he'd followed her, how he'd broken the door, how the fear had lived in our walls for months. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My voice stayed steady, not because I wasn't scared, but because I'd already lived through the worst part of the story. Mark's lawyer tried to twist my words, asked if maybe I'd provoked him, if I'd escalated the situation by confronting him with a firearm. I looked him straight in the eye and said, if I hadn't, I'd be dead. My daughter might be too. The courtroom went silent again. When it was Mark's turn to speak, he didn't deny breaking in. He just said he lost control, that he didn't mean to hurt anyone. He talked about how much he loved Emily, how alcohol had ruined his judgment, how he was trying to make amends. The words came out polished, practiced. But I could see it, that same spark of entitlement flickering under his calm act. The kind of man who still believed he was the victim. The judge saw it too. The restraining order became permanent. Mark was sentenced to 18 months in jail for aggravated assault and violating the order. It wasn't much, a year and a half, but it was something. A line drawn in ink this time, not just in fear. When we walked out of the courthouse that day, the sky was gray, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Emily looked up at the clouds and said, "It feels like he's still out there somewhere." I said, "He is. But so are we." The months that followed were quiet again, but this time the quiet felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was healing. The house slowly came back to life. Laughter returned. Dinner conversations stretched longer, and the smell of coffee in the mornings didn't carry tension anymore. Emily started therapy. She began writing again, small essays, journal entries, little pieces about resilience. One night, she handed me a page she'd written. At the top it said, "When fear becomes courage." I read it slowly. It wasn't about me. Not really. It was about her. About how people don't realize when abuse begins. How it starts small, disguised as care, disguised as love. How by the time you see it for what it is, it's already wrapped around you. And how sometimes it takes someone else's courage to remind you that you still have your own. I folded the page and kept it in my wallet. As for me, I never touched the gun again. I locked it away and placed it in a safe deposit box at the bank. I didn't want it in the house anymore. Not because I regretted what I did, but because I didn't want to keep reliving that night every time I opened a drawer. One evening, months later, Emily got a letter. No return address, just her name. Inside, a single line written in Mark's handwriting, "You can't hide forever." She froze when she read it. I took the letter from her hands and looked at it for a long time. It wasn't fear I felt this time, just exhaustion. I put it in a plastic bag and took it straight to the police. A week later, we got a call from the prison warden. Mark had been found with access to a smuggled phone, used for sending threats to multiple people, not just us. He was transferred to solitary confinement for the rest of his sentence. That was the last we ever heard of him. Years passed. Emily eventually moved to another city, started her own counseling practice for women in abusive relationships. I watched her grow into someone strong, unshakable, someone who had seen darkness and decided to become light anyway. Every so often, when she visits, we sit at the same table where everything once went wrong. But it doesn't feel cursed anymore. The walls are freshly painted, the glassware new. Sometimes we even open a bottle of wine, just one glass each. And every time I pour it, I think of that night, of the moment I refused to pour another glass, and how that one refusal changed everything. Because that's what people never tell you. Sometimes survival doesn't start with strength. It starts with one small act of defiance, one moment where you say no more. That's how the story began. And that's how it ended, with a glass I never poured.